until I had 2 kids, I was teaching full time, and then I got to a point where I was like, this feels like a lot, and then I quit, and then I got pregnant with twins. So God knew it was time for me to quit teaching. So anyway, it's so great to be here today. So Jesse asked me, well, here, let me show you my family, because they're pretty cute. So yeah, here they are. This is baby Cece. So they're just 7 months. We have Peter, who's 5. We have the twins who are 3. You've probably heard or seen them in mass, usually without shoes, usually running where they shouldn't be. And then Claire, who is 8 in 2nd grade here at St. Columcille. And then my husband, Scott. So there we are with the photographer, because I can't get a picture of our family otherwise. It's like we have to pay someone to get everyone looking at the camera. So this was pretty impressive here. Okay, when Jesse asked me, talk about Christian living, at first I was like, okay, Christian living, what is Christian living? And then it kind of occurred to me, I was like, what is living? Like, what is living fully? Like, before we even get to the question of what is Christian living, it's really important to say, like, what does it mean to be human? Like, what is our purpose? What is living? Like, what are we supposed to live like? What should it look like? So, St. Irenaeus, I love this quote. The glory of God is man fully alive. Let's just think about that for a moment. We want to know what it means to live as Christ lived. I think we first have to say, like, what does it mean to be fully alive? And maybe this is something you've thought about, and maybe you think, like, isn't everyone fully alive? But I want you to think for a minute. Do you know someone, perhaps there's someone in your life that you know, who just, like, seems just on fire with life, just excited about living for almost like no reason? Like, what is it? Like, what is that secret? What is that contagious spark that you have? And that is what we are called to. That is joy. And St. Irenaeus would say that that is because God exists. God is in us when we are fully alive. And when God is in us, we are fully alive. And so I kind of just want to unpack this a little bit. What does it mean to be fully alive? Well, the first question is, what is our purpose? Like, I would say being fully alive means living out our purpose. And before we do that, we have to say, well, what is our purpose here on earth? So, catechism quiz, since this is confirmation class. Does anyone know in the catechism what it actually says? Like, it literally tells you. You don't have to like stress about this. Like, what is the purpose of life? What's my purpose? You can actually open the catechism of the Catholic Church, because you're Catholic. You have this lovely guidebook, right? And it tells you. It literally says the purpose of our life is. Does anyone know? Anyone know and they just don't want to say it? Anyone have an idea if someone said, what's the purpose of life? Or what do you think the Catholic Church says the purpose of life is? Follow the 10 Commandments. Yes!
To live good.
To live good. Yes. We are called to live well, aren't we? Yeah. I like that. So anyway, here it is actually from the Catechism, straight from the Catechism, okay? God put us in the world to know, love, and serve Him. We have 3 tasks. Know, love, and serve Him. And so come to paradise. So we're called on this earth for these 3 things. To know God, to love God, and to serve God. And I also would argue that those 3 flow from each other in that order, and I'm going to kind of unpack those a little bit more. But I also want you to notice that the end goal is heaven, right? We're on this earth. We're called to be living fully and joyful and happy and live with purpose on this earth. But this isn't the end. Our true purpose is infinite happiness in living in eternity with God forever. That's pretty cool. That's what we're created for, guys. So when things start to feel a little bit off, you're like, why do things not feel right in my life, or what's off? It's always good to take a step back and say, oh, maybe because I'm not living into my purpose. Maybe because I've forgotten that the end goal is eternity. Sometimes we get bogged down in the things that are right in front of us and we forget. Living with God in paradise is the end. And that's so hopeful. So, to know, love, and serve Him, what does that mean? Okay, to know God. This is Peter. He's 5. Of all my kids, he's the one who has all the really funny insights. I'm like, you know God in a way that most adults don't. Anyway, I have a picture of him up here because I have kind of a funny story about knowing and loving. Right? We have to know someone or something before we can love it. So it was, I think it was Good Friday, like 2 years ago. So he was like 3.5 or something. And we're at my mom's house and she's like, it's Good Friday, we're gonna cook fish, like a whole fish, like with the eyes and the scales and everything. So we had the fish. And he was so excited about it all day. He's like, I love fish. Like, I'm so excited for dinner, I love fish. And he was like, we're looking at it and talking about it all day. And then it came to dinner time and he was like, ew, I don't like this. This is not good. But it was so funny because he thought that he loved this thing, right? He thought he loved fish, but he didn't know. He didn't actually know what fish tasted like, and it tastes like fish, right? And so I think that's just a reminder to us that in order to love God, we first must know him. So the question is like, how do we get to know God? You know what the good news is? God reveals himself in as many ways as there are people, and then infinitely more. Like, we can get to know God in so many ways, just looking outside, going on a walk, being in creation, being with one another, through the sacraments, through prayer. But the thing that I really want to remind us of, because I think we forget this, that in order to really know God, we need to spend time with him, right? That's how we know him, we spend time with him. And we can do that like whichever way of prayer that works best for you at this time. Or perhaps you're called to, just spend 5 minutes a day in silence, to read the daily readings. But I think the Eucharist is really a place where God reveals himself, where we can know him and know him so deeply. When we look at, that says Luke in case you couldn't guess. So when we talk about the road to Emmaus, right, that story where the 2 disciples are walking with Jesus and they're talking and their hearts are burning within them, right? And they don't realize it's him. They have this drawn out, what is it about him? But then we find out, and they began relating the things on the road and how he was known to them in the breaking of the bread. What a better way to know God than in the breaking of the bread? And so I just want to encourage you, I don't know if you have a habit in your life of just time in front of adoration or in prayer in front of the Eucharist. Even if you're not saying anything, you just sitting in front of the Eucharist is one of the most powerful ways that you can get to know God. And I promise, if you take time to do that, he will reveal himself to you. And as you get to know God, you will fall deeper in love with him. When we talk about like what is love, there's so many ideas in our culture about like what love is. And we talk about it a lot, we throw it around a lot. I want us to remember that God is love. And it's beautiful, right? God's not just a bunch of rules. He's not just, it's like he truly loves us and he will woo us. So I love this quote by Pedro Rubé. Nothing is more practical than finding God. That is then falling in love. Not to fall in love with God, not just like follow his commandments, but like be deeply in love with him in a quite absolute final way. What you are in love with, what seizes your imagination will affect everything. It will decide what will get you out of bed in the morning, what you do with your evenings, how you spend your weekends, what you read, who you know, what breaks your heart, and what amazes you with joy and gratitude. Fall in love, stay in love, and it will decide everything. And so I just encourage you to think about like, well, how am I going to just fall in love with God? He's pursuing you. He wants to fall in love with you. He wants you to fall in love with him. But the first step is knowing him, spending time with him. So I just encourage you to reflect a little bit on what does that look like in my life, getting to know God. How can I spend time with him? And I'm not saying you have to like go pray in church for 10 hours a day, but there's probably some concrete ways maybe that you feel called to, that you can just kind of start that journey and add some of those things in so that you can fall deeper and deeper in love with God. And I want to point out that from love then, once we love someone, kind of the natural call is service, right? So once we know God, then we're called to love him, to fall in love with him, and then it's like, yes, God, I love you. To love is to give. I will give and serve you. But I want to point out this is a third one. So when they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? Talking about the loaves and the fish, right? Yes, Lord, he said, you know that I love you. Jesus said, feed my lambs. So from love naturally flows service. What does it mean to serve God? It means to find him in all things and to do what he's calling you to do at that moment. And it's a different thing for everyone. But if we stay rooted in our love for God, in knowing God, then we are called to serve him. Now, something that I see a lot, and something I've actually experienced, which I'll touch on in a bit, is we think that love is just service. It's like, I love God, therefore I'm going to serve. I'm going to serve, I'm going to do the thing. We live in a culture, right, where it's like, we do. We define ourselves by what we do, not who we are, or not what our relationship is. And so I think it's important to take a step back and to say, when I help other people or serve, is that all I'm doing, or is it rooted in something deeper? Because yes, it's good to serve, it's good to help, it's good to do things for other people. But if that's all we do and we don't have the foundation, we're going to burn out really, really quickly. In fact, Mother Teresa, I just love this concept. When her sisters would come to her and say that they were busy and overwhelmed, she would say, oh, add in another holy hour to your day. And they would say, Mother Teresa, we're so overwhelmed, we don't have time, we have too much to do. She would say, spend another hour in front of the Eucharist. And by the grace of God, things got done, things fell into line, and once you have that in line and in place, then we can go out and serve. So there was a time in my life about a year ago, so we moved here about a year and a half ago, last Thanksgiving. We just had our twins, they were 18 months, we moved here, and then after about 2 months of living here, I found out that I was pregnant. And I was so exhausted at that point. I just remember thinking, how am I going to do this with 2 3-year-old twins? This is exhausting. I am called to serve my family, but I am burnt out. And I don't know if you've ever been in a place, hopefully not in 9th grade, you have felt like extreme burnout. I really hope that that's not your experience, but maybe you know someone, maybe you know adults who have talked about burnout, and I actually found my place myself in a pretty dark place where I was actually pretty depressed. I remember my sister looking at me and she goes, yeah, you need something. You need to figure this out. Like, things are not in order in your life. And there was some pretty deep depression where I was just I can't get out of bed. I'm exhausted, I'm depressed, I don't want to get out of bed, I don't want to serve, I don't want to do any of this. I am so depleted. But in that moment of, I am so depleted and I don't know how I'm going to do this, it was a big wake-up call for me to realize that there were maybe some things I need to reorder in my life and say, what is the root? Like, how can I actually go back to the source to fill up my cup so that I can serve my family? Because after, 4 kids in 8 years, I was burnt out. And I thought that I was like refilling my cup. I was like, oh, I'm tired, I'm just gonna watch another TV show, or like, oh, I deserve to eat like some more chocolate, or yeah, I'm gonna like do this thing. But I wasn't really going back to the source. And so what I had to do was really look at my life and say, okay, if I'm called to stay at home with these 4 to be 5 children, how am I gonna do that? And what I then had to do is really start to design my life from, well, what is the source? How am I going to fill up my cup so that I am not depleted? So it started with, I had a holy hour, like a weekly holy hour. And that right there, I think, was the most transformative thing that I could do, just forcing myself. I signed up, so I had to go. And a lot of days I didn't want to go, but I was like, I said I would do this, so here I am. And I think that right there was the foundation then of all of the other little changes that kind of helped me turn around. So there's a holy hour. I started exercising 3 days a week. Because what are we called to do as humans? Like, we're not called to just be behind a screen or be inside all day, or we're called to move our bodies. And it was like, okay, I need to exercise. Go back to square one, right? I need to spend time in prayer. I need to exercise. I started waking up before my kids so I could get some time in silence, prayer, or just silence. I'm just gonna sit here. And kind of, I started adding more and more of those things into my daily life so that I could serve. And so I just want to encourage you, as you think about like, oh, God has some great plan for me, like I want to go serve, I want to go do this thing, be very careful to remember that the root of that has to be in prayer. Anyway, I'm good now. It's taken a lot of support and a lot of like working at it and kind of climbing out of that. And I'm so thankful for all the people in my life, especially my husband, who put up with a lot of me for a long time that was not very pleasant to be around all the time. But that's love. That's what we're called to do, right? So, lastly, it's not just on this earth. We're called to be with God forever in heaven. Our hearts long for the infinite. And I think when we start to lose sight of that, it's really easy to get really discouraged and depressed about all the things that can go wrong on this earth. But if we can keep that focus, that we are called to join this earth, but also in the next life, And then we can live in hope, right? We can be that person who has that spark and that excitement for life. Because we know that no matter what happens, because things are going to go wrong, right? Like, there's no way you can control your life to the point where things never go wrong. But if you can live in the hope that all of those things will work for your salvation, to help get you to heaven, then we can live in true joy. Also, you guys are receiving confirmation, and it is such a gift. The Holy Spirit will give you the strength, the direction, so that you can navigate this life, so that we can grow in holiness, so that you have the fruits, the strengths, the gifts to really live well and to live fully, not just in this life, but also in the next. So, what is a Christian life? It's a life where we're living fully, where we're laughing, where we're spending time with people that we love, where we're listening to each other, where we're out in nature. Oh, that was another thing. I made myself get outside for like an hour a day. I was like, this is really important. I need sunlight because I'm a human, right? There's a long list of things that we need that doesn't really set us up for success, right? We're called to live in joy. And I just want you to think about that and just remember that the glory of God is indeed man fully alive. And that's all.
2.5-year-old and a 6-month-old, and I feel like children really show us what it means to really be fully alive. So my daughter, she's in preschool, and she loves bugs. I don't know why. She did not get it from me. I did not impart a love of bugs to her, but she loves bugs. And somebody came to her school, and they gave a presentation on worms. So she's on a worm kick right now. So she likes to go to the garden and dig up worms. She was upset because we planted the garden this weekend, and I told her she couldn't dig in it anymore. But so what she's done is she's created a worm home. She's got this like old salad box, and she dumped a bunch of dirt and some like old lettuce and some grass clippings, and she waters it, and she added a whole bunch of worms. And she has kept this worm home for like weeks now. And I thought for sure the worms were gonna die because it's been left in freezing cold, it's been left outside in like the hot, the random hot days we've had. But those worms they're still happy, they're content. She's tried to bring ladybugs home inside to her bedroom into their own little habitat. She really lives into this love of bugs. She also tells me that she loves Jesus with her whole heart, which melts my heart. She has this Jesus doll that she got for Easter, and it goes to bed with her, and it goes in the car, and Jesus climbs on the pew at Mass. And I don't know what the people behind us are thinking, but she has this great love for Jesus, and it's just really beautiful to see, because she's living fully alive. Like, she glorifies God through her innocence, her joy for life, and her outgoing nature. It's just really fun to see her grow and develop. So we're also called to live fully alive, but I think sometimes as adults it's a little bit harder, because a lot more things get in the way. But God wants us to live with joy, with freedom. He wants us living our purpose. He wants us to have deep and intentional friendships. And, ultimately, we cannot do this apart from Jesus. We just can't. So we need him. We need him. And when I was in high school, I was in a different place in my faith life. Like, I went through the motions. I did what my parents instilled in me. I went to Mass. I did attend a Catholic school. We prayed before meals. It was just something I did. But Jesus wasn't someone I knew. And so I struggled. I was really, really, really shy. So when I was a freshman, I wanted to be in choir. And, music has always been a part of my background. I play piano. But I wanted to sing. But that year we had gotten a new choir director, and she wanted auditions. So on the day of auditions, you would not find me auditioning. You found me. This is like literally I sat in the corner and I cried because I was so scared of singing in front of anyone. And that's not something that bothers me at all now. I was pursuing music, not really singing so much as the instrumental side of things, band, all of that. And I found that, there was like this loneliness. Like, I had this desire for friendships, but like none of the friendships and relationships I had at that time were really that satisfying, I guess. Like, I don't know, they weren't rooted in anything of God, and so they weren't fulfilling to me. They weren't making me come alive. So when I was a freshman, the end of my freshman year, that summer, I went to a conference. And at that conference, there's, 2,000 high schoolers, and we're all kneeling in front of the monstrance in the Eucharist. Jesus is there. And this was a profound encounter that I had with Jesus that night. So it was just all in this moment. The priest is processing around with the monstrance, and it was just like, it hit me all of a sudden. I was like, Jesus is a person, and he's real, and he loves me. And I was never the same. I experienced this profound peace. There was this profound joy. I experienced freedom. There was some stuff that had been on my mind over that weekend, and it was lifted. It was gone. And I had never experienced Jesus in a way that was so tangible and so clear. So a few things happened after that. I knew that I wanted him in my life. I knew that I wanted to grow that relationship, because that's what it was. That was the very beginning of this new relationship that I had with him. So this meant some different things. This meant I needed to maintain this life of prayer. I started praying. I realized that the Mass was really important, so I started going to Mass more often when I could, besides on Sundays. And it's hard when you're in high school to go to daily Mass. If you're at Wallard, I think you have more opportunities to go before school starts. And so in the summers I would go. I also found that I started kind of outgrowing that really intense shyness. I actually, by my junior year, auditioned for the musical and sang a solo on stage in front of an audience, which, based on where I was a couple years prior, that was a big deal. So, I had these things shifting and changing. And until that point, I was like one track. I wanted to be a music teacher when I left high school and went on to college. But after this encounter, I realized, well, maybe that's not really what I want to do. But I really struggled with this idea of changing courses, because I felt like I had invested so much time and effort into getting good at what I did, which was playing the saxophone. And so I didn't know what to do. I could see my life going in this other direction where I liked the idea of teaching, but thought, well, shoot, maybe I don't want to teach music, but how can I just abandon this? So when my senior year rolled around, I had this there was this fork in the road, if you will. There was a couple of different paths. Ultimately, it came down to two schools. I could go to this school over here that had a really great music program. I could go to this school over here that had a really great Catholic identity, a great theology degree, a great community life on campus. And so at this point in my life, this felt like the biggest and only decision I was ever going to have to make. And I really struggled with it. So I decided I'm going to do what God wants me to do, and I'm going to go to this Catholic college. And so I decided that's where I'm going to go. So I went. And I stayed for a week. And I had this anxious mental breakdown. I was freaking out. I was homesick. I was like, the music program here is terrible. What am I going to do? My dad was like, well, I'll come pick you up if you want me to. I was like, please come pick me up. And I kid you not, after 1 week, I packed up my dorm room and I left and I went back to this other school. I had done the hard part. I was already there and I left. And I was upset with myself. Because I knew this is what God wanted. I knew this is what I ultimately wanted. But it felt like this big sacrifice. And I was just like, no, I can't do this right now. That's not what I want. Not really. Even though it was. It was this weird juxtaposition of things going on in my heart. And so I stayed a year at that school. And I can say a few things. I learned a lot. I also learned that I did not have a lot of joy in pursuing my own will over God's will. He used that time and he worked through me and he was near to me, but I had no Catholic community on campus. I had no church. I had no tabernacle I could go sit in front of and pray, because I was not only at a secular university, it was not a state school, so there was no Newman Center. So it was very isolating. So after that year, I went back. I went back to the Catholic college. I got my degree in theology, and I was able to pursue a career, a job in ministry. So after I left college, I moved, I found a job in ministry. I did that for a few years, and then it's the question of, okay, what's my vocation? Like, what do I do with my life? Which was a whole different story that I'm not really going to get into right now. But I ultimately did get married, and then a few years ago, I ended up leaving ministry to stay at home with my kids. And, God is constantly working and changing and working in our lives, so that way we might find joy in Him. And right now, it's with my kids. It's the hardest work I've ever done, but there is still a lot of joy in being with Him and doing His will in that way. So living fully alive can look like so many different things. From being in ministry to being a stay-at-home mom to, being a student and doing it well. And sometimes it means living really intentionally. Sometimes it means saying no to things that are not really great for us in our lives. Sometimes it means putting limits on screen time. Like, I have found that social media, my phone, are such huge distractions and are such huge roadblocks to living fully in my life. I don't know if you feel the same way, but I've had to put some serious limits on that just to live more fully and more intentionally. And so, as I leave you, I want to leave you with a story, a Bible scripture passage that you have certainly heard by now, the end of Easter season or midway through. So I'm going to read this to you and just offer you a couple of things to reflect on as we kind of go on from here tonight. So this is Matthew chapter 28, verses 1 through 10. Now after the Sabbath, toward the dawn of the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to see the tomb. And behold, there was a great earthquake, for an angel of the Lord descended from heaven, and came and rolled back the stone and sat upon it. His appearance was like lightning, and his clothing white as snow. And for fear of him the guards trembled and became like dead men. But the angel said to the women, "Do not be afraid, for I know that you seek Jesus who was crucified. He is not here, for he is risen, as he has said. Come, see the place where he lay. Then go quickly and tell his disciples that he has risen from the dead, and behold, he is going before you to Galilee. There you will see him. Behold, I have told you." So they departed quickly from the tomb with fear and great joy, and ran to tell his disciples. And behold, Jesus met them and said, "Hail!" And they came up and took hold of his feet and worshipped him. Then Jesus said to them, "Do not be afraid. Go and tell my brethren to go to Galilee, and there they will see me." So the women found this tomb empty. Jesus was not there because he has risen, and they left with great joy. It is joy that we find in Jesus. It is joy that we find in living in his resurrected self. And Pope Francis, in his Easter Vigil homily, it's really great. If you just can Google it and find you can find the whole text online. It's pretty short. But he talks about how we have all these sealed tombs in our life, that we just grow stagnant in these areas. Like, what are the sealed tombs in your life that Jesus just desires to resurrect and to air out and to bring joy and light into? What are those areas? Where do you wish to be more alive? And how is Jesus calling you to live more fully today? So think about some of these things and just really allow Jesus to live and act and work in your life that you may live more fully. Thanks.
He was clearly dead, and he rose from the dead. Does that change your life in any way? Fundamentally change your life? That's the point of data that you kind of have to answer for yourself to be the for the most part, you know, it kind of like makes sense when grandpa or great-grandpa, whatever, grandma are worried about it, right? Because they're like 85 years old and they're nearing death, so maybe they should be thinking about this. But the piece that I've learned, and I kind of heard it both tonight in Amy's story and in Maggie's story, was that we kind of experience moments of death in our life prior to dying. You know, when you have someone betray you, that's someone you really trusted, there's just kind of dying inside a little bit of going, oh, I trusted somebody, and can I rise again from it? Can I rise from the deaths in my life? When we have that experience, then it makes sense to be a disciple of Jesus. Until you have that, it's pretty tough. And when I started thinking about this, when I was in high school, we had a young lady she did all the plays and all that kind of stuff. We called her a drama queen. Because every time that something bad happened to someone, her automatic response was, I would just die. I would just die. You know, it was just this automatic response. And so we would start to do it before she would have a chance to say it. If something like, she was so embarrassing, and we'd go, I would just die. But she captured that sense of that experience of like, oh my gosh, that would be a moment of death to me. I talked about that tonight because I want to start at a place for a scripture passage, and this from I'm going to pass it on to the next scripture. This is a passage that isn't talked about very often. It's a story of the Gerasene Demoniac. I just like to say the name. That's the reason. So just to set this up a little bit and think about it, this is from the 5th chapter of Mark. And the apostles and Jesus were on the other side of the lake with a large group of people. There were so many people pushing in on them that they had to get in the boat just to talk to them. These people were their friends and family members. They were the Jewish community. And Jesus says to the 12, let us get in the boat and go to the other side. So, as they're going across on the water, the storm picks up, and Jesus is sleeping in the boat. And they wake him up and say to him, do you not care that we are perishing? You're dying here? So they have this tension. And now, where we pick this up, they came to the other side of the sea, to the territory of the Gerasenes. That is the pagan area. So let's say you were dropped off in Des Moines at Valley High School, or whatever not know how they're going to react. These apostles are walking into this, and there's nothing good going on here. And then it gets worse. You know, you ever have a bad day at school, just going to go home and crash, and you get home, you walk in the door, and there's a list. Do the laundry, mow the lawn, clean the bathroom. Okay. So they go to the Gerasene the other side. When Jesus got out of the boat, at once a man from the tombs who had unclean spirit met them. The man had been dwelling among the tombs, and no one could restrain him any longer, even with a chain. In fact, he even frequently had bound with shackles and chains, but the chains had been pulled apart by him, and the shackles smashed, and no one was strong enough to subdue him. Night and day, among the tombs, on the hillside, he was crying out and bruising himself with stones. Okay. Put yourself in this context. Who's the strongest guy here? Is anybody breaking chains lately? You are confronted with this guy who can rip chains off of his wrists, who is bruising himself with stones and is a threat. But what happens? What do you put in a tomb? Dead people, right? Who chained him among the tombs? His own community. Think about that. If your parents just said, "You're too much of a pain, I'm going to go chain you to a stone and mount out of it. You're dead to me." His whole community said, "You're dead to me." People tried to chain him there. But even worse, he breaks the chains. He has the ability to leave, and he doesn't. He would rather stay with the dead than with the living. Does anybody imagine a life worse than that? I'd rather be dead. This is tough stuff. Think about Jesus now for a moment. Catching sight of Jesus from a distance, he ran up. Okay. Guy is breaking chains, hurting himself with rocks, and he runs at you. What are you going to do? All of a sudden, this man drops and lays prostrate against the lid flat in front of Jesus. What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? Do not torment me. So this man was invaded by legion. And you know, who was speaking the demons, but I don't want to focus on that tonight. He encountered Jesus. He ran to Jesus. He did not leave Jesus as a distant thing. I think this is something that Amy talked about in First Adoration, about being close, creating space in your life for God. I think that's what's happening there. You just have a little bit of closeness. He ran and prostrated himself. And then, this is a great line right there. Sent the legion 2,000 swine running down the hill. This is quite the deal. And they rushed down the steep bank into the sea and were drowned. Swineherds ran away and reported the incident in town, and the people came out to see what had happened. Same community coming out, now they get to encounter Jesus. What was their response? Those who witnessed the incident explained to them what had happened, and to the possessed man and to the swine. And just to go back one line, look at 15. As they approached Jesus, they caught sight of the man who had been possessed by legion, sitting there clothed and in his right mind. So they have the data of proof. In front of their eyes, they have a healing of this person completely, who's clothed and sitting there in his right mind. The man who was dead to them came back to life. And I think this is the point where, just to think about this a moment, this man later on hears about Jesus. Hey, did you hear about that? You know that guy that healed you? Yeah, it was a beautiful thing. They're telling us now that he rose from the dead. And this man says, yeah, what's the big deal? I rose from the dead. Of course that will be what happened. Until we have that resurrection in our own lives, it's hard to understand how powerful this is. But the other side of this is that people can see it. They have the data of proof sitting right in front of them. This man sitting there. And they are seized with fear. Then they begged him to leave their district. That's the first line of this whole passage. It's not about the legion, it's not about the man being left out in the tombs. They begged him to leave. We start to think about controlling our lives by getting rid of Jesus. And that's exactly, they value their pigs. And in defense, I figured that out. 2,000 pigs would be about 50,000 pounds of bacon. That's a lot of loss. But they value those pigs over that human being. And you are going to be going through that decision the rest of your lives. Are you going to value the one over whatever the gain is otherwise? You should expect to be treated that way, and you should live that way. Because Jesus, 2,000 pigs for the salvation of that man, there was no question. dignity of that life. But here is where, so they begged him to leave their district. Jesus never imposes himself on them. The next line, there's no, hey, idiots, I can heal you. As he was getting into the boat, is the next line. You don't want me here. I'm not imposing myself on you. I hope you can encounter love. I should tell you days more. But not this man who experienced the resurrection. As he was getting into the boat, the man who had been possessed pleaded to remain with him. Think about that language of pleaded. Oh, please. But Jesus would not permit it. Oh, man. Why not? Why not? That is one of the things that one of the things that I would love to just share along the way is that sometimes to receive your no's or your failures, or supposed failures, as gifts as much as yeses and successes. You learn more about yourself really through no's than you do your yeses. That is just not stunning. So this man just wanted to be close to Jesus now. I just want to hang out with you. No. I'm calling you to something more. Go home. Tell your people what I have done for you. And he did it. The reason we know that he did that is that when Jesus was back, about 2 chapters later in the Gospel of Mark, that time around, the people did not send him away. They brought all of those who needed to be cured to him. This disciple went out and proclaimed Christ in a place where he didn't want to be. He wanted to be with Jesus. This was a great experience. This encounter was incredible. My faith is deep, and I want to be with you. Empower my Christian action. Let me be with you. No. And this is the invitation for you to reflect upon this summer. To look for every opportunity to serve. And to get it wrong even. To try things and go, oh, that didn't work out. I suggested like what you could do is if you couldn't, you could always get a job and give halfway to good projects or purposes, like an example, a friendly neighborhood St. Collins. Just go work for the summer, 40 hours a week, and then give half to the St. Collins. It's not self-serving at all. But I think it is to think about and reflect on what your summer is going to be like. What's it going to look like? I looked at something, babysitting for your neighbor's kids. That's not a small event. That is a huge gift, particularly for that parent. To be for others in the likeness of Christ is our calling. It'll become more real when we can unite our hearts with this Gerasene Demoniac.